Ansary here, coming to you on a very historic evening. For those of you that have been following the YouTube channel, you've noticed that there's been an uptick in my commentary on the sun. I've been discussing this for over a decade, and the possibility that within our lifetimes that we could see some major changes. What we have right now in New York City is an example of some pretty heavy-duty change. They're comparing it to 1977. So we're going to look at some of the basic facts together here tonight. It was just several days ago that I was discussing a geomagnetic storm that was one of the stronger of the geomagnetic storms for at least several weeks. We're in a solar minimum, right? But it doesn't mean that we are not affected by things like that. So officially, there's an investigation, right, being conducted right now with regards to this blackout in New York City. These are a few slides. I'm not going to rush tonight's report. I am having to be very focused at this time. Things are very difficult financially. YouTube is it's a very corrupt platform, and it's made it difficult to make a living doing this. That's not your fault. That doesn't really necessarily involve you. However, just want to let you know things have been pretty difficult. However, it doesn't come as a surprise. Meanwhile, we see things heat up with the nation of Iran. Major things taking place. The UK stepping in and arresting an Iranian captain after an oil tanker was stopped, seized. I mean, are we not seeing an increase in these geopolitical tensions as we see an increase in solar activity? Right? So we can have a spotless sun, for example, just so you understand this. We can have a spotless sun, but still, our field can be affected every 27 to 28 days by the rotation of the sun. These coronal holes. I believe her name is Tamitha. She's a pretty decent channel with regards to, sticking with the science. Now, I speculate in a number of different directions in my presentation and in the material. Also, if you go to the public forums over at outsidethebox.vhx.tv, I have made a special section public in which some of my recent essays are posted. So I'm looking at this information. I'm presenting these videos to you in the weeks running up to a historic event that hits New York City. And again, we're not even really looking at the specific details. I'm just kind of blown away. And I think that this is an appropriate time to reflect over this information that some people may have rolled their eyes over. And over the years, I've given this some thought. Is this going to be a quick event? Is the whole grid going to go down at once? Or is it going to be more of an incremental? Right? We've talked about it. I've talked about the possibility of, this being an incremental thing, something that we just start seeing more of as time goes on. Now, we live in a world, with all due respect, although I'm not here trying to oppress the fellow humans, there's a lot of animalism in our world. No offense to animals. But there's a lot of lower nature running amok. And part of that is the lack of intellectualism in today's society. Let's go over here real quick. Just want you to understand. So they're saying officially they're investigating, air quotes, they're investigating the cause of a massive New York City blackout. And I'm not citing or claiming that there's a conspiracy afoot if we don't necessarily hear about the solar influence. Let's go back over here to some of the slides. Again, because you're going over material that I put out there back in 2013. And recently, right as they're announcing that they were in the initial stages of solar cycle 25. Right before that, right, or I coordinate to do a radio show where I bring this work that basically, a half a solar cycle ago, I wrote an ebook. Do you see me pumping that ebook all the time? The answer is no, right? Because I believe that the investigations need to continue, that it's not over yet, that there is another book for me to write on what I've been looking at in recent years, new information. But it was rewarding for me, looks like we have streaming video here, to be able to present the idea with people outside of this YouTube channel. It's about the grid, but it's also about human consciousness, how people react and behave during key parts of the cycle. And so when we look at periods in time in which we're seeing an increase in the aurora borealis during certain periods, especially when it's seen in certain areas, when it's normally not seen. There's a section within the ebook, is the aurora borealis a sign of war? There is a sign of war on the horizon. When we start to see unusual changes. And now you're in the day and age of the magnetic field reversal potentially happening within our lifetime. A new study in the last year shows that it could happen. And so by looking at trees, by looking at the ancient record that is held within trees, by looking at other nations beyond our own for scientific clues, like China, right? Now, we have a world right now that is going through major change. How might a blackout on one part of the planet affect the global power structure, balance of power, or the ability for one nation to wage war on another? Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind, that the sun's behavior is a wild card. Who's to say then the future may be divine intervention isn't working through the sun, or is working through the sun? Because there's a great possibility that that which we would call God may and can, perhaps already does. So keep that in mind when we look at other events when technology has been disrupted, and we look at a couple things. We now can add this event. And this event in which the governor has said, oh man, we got to fix this. This cannot happen. Well, they don't exactly know at this point officially what caused this blackout. Now keep in mind, we're heading towards 2021, 2022. Look at what takes place geopolitically in my warnings as we cross the 2020 threshold. I would recommend that people don't get too distracted by the political circus, even reactionary politics, and that has its own definition. Keep your eye, as I say, keep your eye on the ultimate prize, but keep your eye on where we're going with this. Don't allow certain distractions to take us away from the reality that we are now seeing the sun likely influencing real world behavior. Now, they may not say that that's the case. They may come back. Let's look at something else. Let's go back to Google News. Google is doing weird things, supposedly. Well, let's look at headlines tonight. I was talking with a friend about how even though there may be some politicians on both sides that seem popular with their demographic, be it the left, be it the right, be it up, be it down, the type of back and forth that's taking place right now when America is already at each other's throats, a lot of things seem scripted. Sometimes I wonder if some people are there, maybe selected for a specific reason, not so much elected. And understand, I'm talking about a number of different people. And I think that it's It's in the interest of the powers that be to have various people's champions on all sides. And people get pumped up over what they see on TV. And I think that it's important that people understand these things. Okay, so a whole trickle down effect of decisions can influence a mass migration of humans from one place to another. Keep in mind at least what you've learned from me about magnetite in the human brain, about how during certain periods, energy periods, some people may feel the compulsion to move from one place to another, while the power elite may be launching wars or events that lead to wars, or in some cases lead to people fleeing certain areas. And what if there is a larger psyops that's going to come from this that most people aren't even taking a look at? One thing that I will say to you about the media, even if we may associate ourselves with having, for example, compassion for many, many people, here's something that I'd like to say. Where is the compassion for others from the mainstream media regarding the last 20 years in particular in certain key parts of the world? Where's the compassion for the kids? I have compassion for the kids, but I have compassion for kids everywhere. We're waiting for a page to load. Stand by. 1859 Carantine event. Keep in mind the Civil War launch within several years of 1859. How many times do people talk about 1859 and the Carantine event? And so all this information has been out for years, and that the real risk is the power plants. And so the powers that be, this is a really key area to understand if you plan to attempt some strategic relocation. What have the powers that be, ask yourself this, what have they done to reinforce the grid? People like the late Matthew Stein, who's no longer alive, who's a former guest of mine. I've talked to him several times. I believe he's been on Coast to Coast, even several other major shows, big shows. As far as I'm concerned, he did something great by warning the people. He warned the people that live in the dense population areas about the power plants. And Matthew Stein, who wrote multiple books on preparing for this event, is no longer alive. Who are we to think that he's not in a better place because of the actions that he did? Now, I'm going to go over this with you and leave you with this. I'm going to let you know again that I'm doing what I need to do to survive economically. And I understand that there's a lot of people suffering. There needs to be greater dialogue regarding solutions to what a lot of people are going to be doing in the coming years as things become even more difficult. A lot of people are facing economic challenges, but they're not in full-on depressions. How are things going to fare out in these major dense population centers in a massive depression with the cost of food going up the roof? Now, I know there was a mouthful in there. Let's come back to that. And let me also let you know, even though if it's not on the front page, there may be videos that I've done on urban survival. Type in Alex Ansary Urban Survival series. There's about 4 videos. One of the themes was dealing with a mob and basic advice for males with women in situations to where you may be dealing with mobs. For years and years, I've think tanked various scenarios. Urban survival, when people are basically becoming zombies because they haven't eaten enough. I mean, these are literally like the main themes of podcasts that go back multiple years. And there was even a point in which I thought this stuff was too controversial to put out. And now that the most amount of people, we're at a time in which more people could use this information that are at risk. But it's coming at a time in which the algorithms of oppression have made it harder for a guy like me to reach the world. When that happens and I struggle with a few hundred views in my 15th year and I'm not getting the reach that I need, I wonder how needed my message really is. So what I'm going to do is use my best judgment as I have been the last month. And there is a purpose why I have centered my focus on the solar sciences. It may not make sense to you now, or it may not make sense at all, right? But there is a purpose in zoning in on a central topic that connects other topics, especially when it relates to people's lives, whether people eat or not, whether or not the lights are on or not. And so here you have an actual event where there's a transformer fire. And if we've learned anything from the Matthew Stein interview and his amazing article, 400 Chernobyls, which is highlighting the threat of these Eastern population regions. And here we have an event in New York City, where my mother lives, where some of you may have family, where many people have family in the Big Apple. It's New York City. And I believe it was last night that the power came back. And so I'm sure that YouTube is full of various gatherings. This looks like a video post from Twitter. The internet is on at the moment, so we might be able to get this to play. It's later in the day, but I wanted to bring this to your awareness as a follow-up to some of the recent videos and some of the recent things that we've been covering as an example of one of those synchronicities that I've been discussing. There are certain synchronicities with regards to the sun and research regarding the sun, periods in which people are receptive to knowledge about the sun, periods in which there are people talking about the sun, articles coming out, and I have never seen such a quickening of articles about the sun. Literally, there is some sort of like what's called 100th monkey. So whether we have channels talking about the magnetic field reversal, or whether you have channels talking about solar minimum, or other things. There's a couple graphics here in the slideshow. You know, these images do overlap in their meaning when you look at the geopolitical predictive programming and the changes in the sun. I am someone that in the alternative media in our day and age, I am a pioneer with regards to presenting this idea and these unique takes on the changes in the sun that are not orthodox. These are ideas on the sun. These are suspicions about the methodology of the powers that be, the power elite, their strategy. How they, whoever they are, and I'm not so sure that's limited to human, but how do they manipulate the human species? How do the powers that be control humanity through the solar cycles? There aren't a lot of people that have even hypothesized that are in the world of ufology. And I've made a contribution to the research community. Now, I'm seeing world events that I've been concerned about for over a decade slowly manifest, and I'm going, oh, damn. So I'm not trying to be all over the map here, but we did just cross through the eclipse in 2019, earlier this year. And we are on our way to the eclipse, the partial lunar eclipse of July 16th, 2019, after several solar flares. We talked about that in a recent video, and then wham, we see an event. We see a event in the United States, in New York City. We also see ongoing clashes as we see an increase in solar activity. There are a number of clashes that are increasing between the people in Hong Kong and the Chinese police. They're about to go into the next level of the police state in China. It's an extradition bill. Most of you are familiar with China and Hong Kong. And so the people of Hong Kong that have been living in a different territory, at least until 1997, they're looking at their future Chinese police state. And they're not down with it. And they're seeing how deeply embedded their politicians are with the CCP, even though to some people that's coming as a surprise to them. And so you look at Iran, you look at China, you look at domestic unrest and protests and mental health breakdowns. Look at suicide rates up 33% in 20 years, right? In line with the changes in the sun and the changes in the magnetic field. And then we see a power outage, historic, like 1977. And it's time to begin to connect the dots. So there's actually a separate essay that I wrote about solar flare survival from a spiritual, moral perspective. The extreme cliff notes is you can read this book, this book, this book, and I cite a few. All right, you can look at Joel Skousen's Strategic Relocation. I also have my own opinions on the matter. You can look at Matthew Stein's When Technology Fails, the late, great Matthew Stein. You can look at Stan Deo's book, Holly Deo's book. I guess she's going to be writing a new one, according to Coast to Coast AM. Right, but what about spiritual survival? What about the will to live? As we deal with the cosmic rays, as people deal with psychic attack, as people deal with these other things, even voices in the head. I don't believe at this present moment that voices in the head phenomena is limited to electronic harassment. I believe that changes in the geomagnetic field can subtly contribute to the voices in the head phenomena. This has been documented in Solar Revolution. If you look hard at these studies, at how changes in the field has affected people, you can find a correlation with voices in the head. And so some people might be intelligent enough to realize what it is, going, oh, wow, we're picking up on something. This is pretty trippy. And other people may not. And other factors like potential possession may be possible with some humans. That's a deeper conversation for another time. Tonight, I believe, is a historic night. I'm going to leave you with this information. Let's pray for the people of New York City. Let us take this moment, including myself, to give ourselves a little polite pinch and realize this is not a game. What we're talking about, this is not a joke. We have just seen a major blackout in the largest U.S. city, one of the largest cities in the world, at a period in which we're going into a new solar cycle. Days ago, we saw several geomagnetic storms back to back, which is not common. But we're in a deep solar minimum, but it doesn't mean that we're not affected by the sun and the coronal holes and the faster, slow solar wind as the sun rotates, even if it is a spotless sun. As the Earth's magnetic field gets thinner, we're also going to be talking about potential asteroid issues in the future. I will also encourage you to join my Patreon, okay? So YouTube isn't cashing out, paying out with the apocalypse. I'm not going to give you a long sob story. You can do a little Googling in about 5 minutes, figure out what's going on. You need to understand that it's bipartisan, though. It's all different types of media, including things that are not political. This is not just politics. There are people that are not into politics or super political that are hurt by the new algorithm changes. As YouTube now exclusively, in some cases, promotes the mainstream primarily with elements of independent media that it considers sanitized enough to continue suggesting. For content creators like myself, we've seen a major drop in income beginning in April 2017. Then it normalized a little bit, to where I lost, a certain amount. Then I was back to maybe getting 100 a month, maybe something I can do something with, to losing even that. So basically, if you didn't already know, this content that I'm creating for you is listener supported. And I will continue to create this content. And I will also do what Alex Ansary needs to do to make his payments without defaulting. And so we will continue this conversation. Please check out the links down below. I'm Alex Ansary signing off.